But all this was connected to a left where people like Paul Sweezy and Leo Huberman, who started Monthly Review, and not Nathan, who was involved in the beginning, and Einstein and Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois, and all of these people were connected, and Lillian Hellman in a common fight, and it wasn't narrow; it was broad. It defended human rights, human freedom, and democracy in the fullest sense, and argued on a materialist and humanist basis, starting with alliance. I mean, rooted in the struggles of workers, and this is something that we have to get back, and we have to get back the kind of public intellectuals, sort of real left intellectuals, Marxist intellectuals, who are not just academics writing academic articles under the name of Marxism on some abstruse concept, which, that's valuable in a way, but you actually have to be involved in as an organic intellectual, as Gramsci said, in the struggle, in education, in the deepest sense, and in the hope for a new world, because ultimately, as Epicurus says, it's up to us.
Hello and welcome. I'm Lynn Fries, producer of Global Political Economy, or GPEnewsdocs. That opening short was a quick preview of what's coming up in this segment. This is part 4 of an ongoing conversation with John Bellamy Foster. In parts 1 through 3, John Bellamy Foster unpacked a seminal trilogy, Marx's Ecology, The Return of Nature, and Breaking the Bonds of Fate, on a millennia-long struggle for human freedom, in the long march from Epicurus through Marx and into the present. This, then, is the story of the more complete materialist philosophical view of nature and society that resulted from the synthetic development of materialist thinking, from Epicurus's materialism in the 3rd century BCE through Marx's 19th century ecological materialism. So the more complete materialism, by which Marx, who considered Epicurus's philosophy the birthplace of socialism, carried Epicurus's fight from antiquity into a revolutionary challenge to capitalism in modern times. At the end of part 3, Bellamy Foster's comments delved into the historical trajectory in which this more complete materialism underpinned humanity's class struggles for a socialist future. The discussion then turned to Bellamy Foster's preface and introduction to the 75th anniversary reprint of Einstein's Why Socialism, in which he gives Einstein a core role in the contemporary struggle for socialism. So I asked him to talk about that book, Albert Einstein's Why Socialism, the enduring relevance of his classic essay, and specifically the context in which Einstein and contemporary real intellectuals, including the founders of Monthly Review, engaged in resisting the systematic suppression of the case for socialism under McCarthyism and the challenges left to us. John Bellamy Foster is editor of Monthly Review and professor of sociology at the University of Oregon. He's a prolific author, co-author, and editor. As well as today's featured books and many others, he's authored Capitalism in the Anthropocene, The Dialectics of Ecology, and co-authored The Robbery of Nature and the Ecological Rift. Bellamy Foster's work has been awarded numerous distinctions. His book, The Return of Nature, won the Deutscher Memorial Prize. We go now to part 4 and John Bellamy Foster's comments on Einstein's Why Socialism.
Einstein wrote his famous essay, Why Socialism, for the first issue of Monthly Review in May 1949, Volume 1, Number 1. And there's been a lot of discussion about this because the why socialism has influenced so many people. It's probably the single best introduction to socialist thinking in that number of words. History of Einstein, his biography isn't really well known. I mean, especially the political aspects, but he was a socialist all of his life. And in Germany in the early 1930s, of course, before Hitler's rise, he used to give all sorts of lectures on science to working class meetings. And he came out of this whole tradition, and it was really a coming out of a realist, materialist tradition philosophically, and but he believed, like Marx, that science really came from the bottom. He tried to convey major scientific discoveries to working class audiences, which is extraordinarily different than the way people think of Einstein. And when he came to the United States, I mean, he was always involved in the socialist groups. He supported socialist movements and revolts. And in Germany, when he came to the United States, he continued to support all left causes. He was really a strong fighter against racism. He was close to W.E.B. Du Bois and so on. But what happened is when I was looking at Why Socialism, which was published in Volume 1, Number 1 of Month Review, I looked at it over the years and knew some of the history of it, but we decided to put out a little book on it, and it required an introduction and I had to do more historical research, and we knew a lot about Why Socialism from Einstein's essay, his writing of Why Socialism, from within Month Review, but I didn't know some of the deep history, and nobody else did either. And it all started with the attempt to create Brandeis University as a new kind of university. I mean, it was going to be a Jewish-based university, but it was secular, and it was going to be under faculty control. Right then, they had limits placed on minorities being admitted to all the institutions of higher education in the United States, and they decided to break that and to let minorities fully into this new university on a meritocratic basis, and make sure that it did that. They had a notion of education more from the bottom. It was a radical view of education. Anyway, Einstein was very interested in this, and all the money came from the Einstein Foundation. There was an Einstein Foundation from Brandeis that was set up. Originally, they were going to name the university after Einstein, but he refused, and he said it should be named after a famous Jewish American, because he was an immigrant, and so one of our more esteemed immigrants, and he said it should be named after a famous American, and they decided on naming it after Louis Brandeis. And but it was funded by the Einstein Foundation, and all the money was coming in because of Einstein's name. But they also set up a separate board of trustees. Einstein was and Einstein's people sort of ran the foundation, but the board of trustees was run by capitalist figures, by people with money, right? And Einstein had this idea, and he brought Paul Sweezy, who was a Marxist economist, and I think he just quit at Harvard, but he was a Harvard Marxist economist, and he had been one of the founders of the Harvard Teachers Union, so he'd been very involved in how do you structure academics. And Einstein brought Sweezy in, partly because Einstein's closest friend was a German economist called Otto Nathan, who was a socialist, a Marxist, and Otto Nathan was very close to Leo Huberman, who was close to Sweezy, and they knew each other, and so they brought Sweezy in to write the plan for Einstein for the Brandeis University, going to be a new kind of university, and it really was. The Sweezy report was incredible, and it was putting control in hands of the faculty, boosting minorities in the institution, really an open university. And the board of trustees, which was accepting it, started to turn against them. Einstein tried to bring in as president a famous Marxist thinker in Britain, and there was just a big, basically the Cold War entered in, and this was like the first This is the beginning of McCarthyism in the universities. They accused Einstein's, Nathan and the other people who were working with Einstein as being Reds and saying they're subversives and un-American, and Einstein withdrew from the foundation, the foundation was changed to the name was changed to the Brandeis Foundation. He wouldn't have anything to do with Brandeis University after that, but then these people who were involved in this, Einstein, Otto Nathan, Leo Huberman, and Paul Sweezy, they all got involved in the Henry Wallace campaign for president. And Sweezy was head of the New Hampshire campaign, and Huberman and Sweezy wrote the preamble to the Progressive Party's document, his political document, and they were all deeply involved in it. Einstein was in pictures with Wallace, and Einstein was very devoted to this, but they were on the same wavelength and kind of working together. And when the campaign collapsed, when Wallace was defeated, they were all kind of depressed, and F.O. Matheson, who's the great Harvard literary critic, offered some money to start Monthly Review, and Matheson had also contributed to had been engaged in helping with Brandeis University and the planning with Sweezy. And so they all came together to start Monthly Review with Otto Nathan as one of the original editors, and Einstein very much involved in it. And Einstein wrote the Why Socialism for the first issue. So this was really kind of fundamental, and like you said, it's a lot of it. Einstein's speech, his article is fundamental because it connects issues of human nature to nature of society, and he explained things very much in terms of Marxist political economy and in describing capitalism, and then he ties that to the need for social change, and ends with education, which is the priority. It has to be built on education. It is really an extraordinary document, only about 6 pages long, and I tried in the book to explain a lot of the details of how it happened, like how Einstein used Veblen and Marx as the fundamentals for talking about human nature and human individuals, and then moving to society. It is really extraordinarily famous document, but never talked about in official circles in the United States. It's sort of Einstein is there, but he's treated as though he was simply a liberal, which isn't accurate. And and there's a book that has come out recently from Princeton, that Einstein on Politics, where they try to look at why socialism and pretend that it's simply liberal views. Like they say, well, Einstein believed in democracy, so he was a liberal, not a socialist, and things like that. And so I replied to those things, showing how wrong and silly, misconceived they were. So, there's also an essay in the book by John Simon, who also covers Einstein's history. I mean, Einstein was fighting. Paul Robeson was in the picture with Einstein and Wallace when W.E.B. Du Bois was being persecuted by the state for being a communist sympathizer or something like that. He was a member of the Peace Committee, World Peace Committee, and they said that, well, that made him a communist. And they took him before the judge, and Marco Antonio, who's the lawyer, told the judge, well, we don't really have any witnesses, but we have one character witness named Albert Einstein. And the judge immediately ended the trial. Just Einstein being there, he wouldn't let Einstein testify because it would be world news, and it would destroy his career. So Du Bois was persecuted by the state, but got off simply on the basis of, which he should have been. He was totally innocent, and what he did wasn't a crime anyway. It was just an ideological attack. But it's Einstein's alliance with Du Bois that's so important. He wrote for Du Bois's Crisis when Du Bois was the editor, and Einstein was just a really strong opponent of racism in the United States and spoke out, but the newspapers didn't report. Only the black newspapers reported what he said. Yeah, so at the end of Why Socialism, Einstein says we need a planned economy. He says we have to have economic planning, but he insists that, of course, we have to do this in a democratic manner. We have to solve those problems, and that we have to make education on behalf of humanity. Really, socialist education has to be the key to the future, because it encompasses all of humanity and emphasizes a freedom within society and the necessity of that we can't live as atomistic individuals or egoistic beings anymore, that we have to be social individuals, conscious of each other, living in reciprocal relations, and planning on the behalf of the welfare of humanity as a whole. That's basic. Those are his words, but that's sort of where he ends up. And he ended up by saying that discussions on this topic are the most important thing in our current age, and that's why he supported the creation of Monthly Review in the middle of the McCarthy era. After that, it was, McCarthyism actually got worse. And Einstein introduced the strategy of using the First Amendment, originally people had tried to use the First Amendment and had been put in prison. And people who were being accused of being communists, or communist sympathizers, and so on, and they were put in prison. And then everybody was they were using the Fifth Amendment, which says you can't testify against yourself, to protect themselves to stay out of prison. But Einstein reinvigorated the use of the First Amendment in the people coming out and defending their positions on that basis, and that was easier for writers than for some other people accused. But the first to follow the Einstein strategy, these were all connected to each other. The Paul Sweezy and Leo Huberman and Lillian Hellman were the first three to use the First Amendment in this stage to fight against McCarthyism, and they were very successful. And Sweezy, in the Sweezy versus New Hampshire, he'd been called up before the New Hampshire Attorney General because on the basis of a speech he gave at the University of New Hampshire, a course he gave, and the Attorney General of New Hampshire demanded his lecture notes, Sweezy's lecture notes. He wanted names of those who had been in the Progressive Party, because Sweezy had been the chair of the Progressive Party in New Hampshire, the Wallace Group, and demanded that he give the names of communists and so on. And Sweezy refused to do any of these things on the basis of the First Amendment. He said that he wouldn't turn over his lecture notes, he wouldn't name names, and he defended people's right to have what political views they had. And that case then went all the way to the Supreme Court of the United States, and then became the leading case on academic freedom. In the Earl Warren Court decided that defended Sweezy's rights, but all this was connected to a left where people like Paul Sweezy and Leo Huberman, who started Monthly Review, and not Nathan, who was involved in the beginning, and Einstein and Paul Robeson and W.B. Du Bois, and all of these people were connected, and Lillian Hellman in a common fight, and it wasn't narrow; it was broad. It defended human rights, human freedom, and democracy in the fullest sense, and argued on a materialist and humanist basis, starting with alliance. Rooted in the struggles of workers, and this is something that we have to get back, and we have to get back the kind of public intellectuals, the sort of real left intellectuals, Marxist intellectuals, who are not just academics writing academic articles on the name of Marxism on some abstruse concept, which, that's valuable in a way, but you actually have to be involved in as an organic intellectual, as Gramsci said, in the struggle, in education, in the deepest sense, and in the hope for a new world, because ultimately, as Epicurus says, it's up to us.
With that concluding thought on Epicurus, we'll leave it there. This has been a 4-part series featuring John Bellamy Foster discussing his trilogy, Marx's Ecology, Materialism and Nature, The Return of Nature, Socialism and Ecology, and Breaking the Bonds of Fate, Epicurus and Marx, featured in parts 1, 2, 3, and from there, the enduring relevance of Einstein's essay, Why Socialism? Many thanks to our guest, John Bellamy Foster. And thank you for joining us.